Hi there. Welcome, listeners, to the second episode of the Environmedicine podcast. My name is Finn,
And my name is Gianna.
and we'll be your hosts for today's episode.
So, us at Environmedicine, we are a student run organization and nonprofit, and we want to showcase the connection between human health and the environment.
For today's episode, we will be talking about water. Hopefully, everyone is familiar with that. The critical issue of water pollution, the impact that it has on human health, understanding different types and sources of water pollution, and its effects on different communities. So, let's jump straight into it. Let's talk about the definition and overview of water pollution. Water pollution is like the contamination of water bodies, so such as rivers, lakes, and oceans, with substances like chemicals, pathogens, and physical pollutants within these bodies of water. And so contamination often arises due to industrial activities, agricultural runoff, improper waste disposal, sewage discharge, and pollutants in water, the spread of waterborne diseases like cholera, typhoid, and hepatitis, particularly in areas lacking access to clean water and sanitation.
So, one of the things that water pollution can bring onto a community is that it can have significant economic, social, and environmental impacts, and it undermines livelihoods, increasing poverty and problems within marginalized communities. Addressing water pollution requires a comprehensive approach with scientific research, policy development, community engagement, and technological innovation. Effective regulation and enforcement is crucial to prevent further contamination and safeguard public safety.
Adding on to that, promoting sustainable practices in industry, agriculture, and waste management is essential to mitigate pollution at its source. Community involvement through grassroots movements, advocacy, and education plays a critical role in raising awareness and holding stakeholders accountable for water pollution. Empowering communities to participate in decision making processes is vital for achieving water quality and environmental justice for all.
All right, so now that we've discussed a brief overview on what water pollution, water contamination is, let's go on to the question and answer, starting with the impact on ecosystems.
So, how does water pollution disrupt aquatic ecosystems? And what are the long term consequences for biodiversity?
All right, so what water pollution can do and how they can disrupt aquatic ecosystems is that it can introduce harmful chemicals like sulfates, microplastics, and different harmful chemicals into these bodies of water. These pollutants can kill aquatic life, reduce reproductive rates, and disrupt food chains. Long term consequences include the loss of species, reduced biodiversity, and weakened ecosystems that are less resilient to changes and other stressors. But to add on to that, water pollution heavily disrupts aquatic ecosystems because they they not only disrupt the way that these marine life reproduce, but they also disrupt how we as humans consume them. Like, for example, these fish in the ocean, they're starting to consume microplastics. So while they consume microplastics, we consume them, and so we ingest microplastics as well. And it's not only that, but like, for example, from where I am from in the Philippines, it has led to severe extinction rates, and not just that, but coral bleaching from the chemicals in the water and whatnot. And that has a lot to say on pollution or plastic pollution and marine pollution's impact on the environment.
That was really insightful. Um, let's move on to another issue that we should bring attention to on human health.
All right, all right. So, on human health, how does contaminated water affect human health, particularly in communities relying on untreated water sources?
So, contaminated water can easily carry diseases such as cholera and typhoid, which I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And these diseases lead to really serious health problems and, in some instances, results even in death. And so, in these communities that rely on water that is unsafe, untreated, and moreover, really, really dangerous,
Yeah.
people become really vulnerable to these diseases
Hmm.
and overall leads to higher rates of illness and mortality.
So, what are the chronic health impacts of long term exposure to low levels of pollutants in drinking water, for example?
Long term exposure to low levels of pollutants, such as like heavy metals, pesticides, and industrial chemicals, can lead to chronic health issues such as cancer, kidney damage, even neurological problems and developmental issues in children.
All right, so now let's move on to the sources and causes of this water pollution.
So, what are the primary industrial activities contributing to water pollution, and how can they be regulated effectively?
So, primary industrial activities include chemical manufacturing, mining, oil refining, and textile production, which often release toxic substances into water bodies. Effective regulation can include enforcing stricter discharge limits, requiring treatment of waste before release, and monitoring water quality.
That's a really great answer. What about agricultural practices and how do they contribute to water pollution? And as well as how, or I guess, what sustainable methods can mitigate this?
So, agriculture contributes a lot to water pollution through runoff containing pesticides, fertilizers, and animal waste. So, this can actually lead to something called eutrophication or algal bloom. So, if you can see those bodies of water that's just covered in green sludge, have you seen that before? So, that's called
Right.
eutrophication, and that heavily depletes the oxygen found in water bodies since these algal blooms consume a lot of oxygen and it deprives the fish in the water of oxygen. So so that in turn releases a very bad mix of nitrates into the water and impacts fish populations in there. So effective regulation that can help stop this is enforcing stricter discharge limits, requiring
Mhm.
treatment, like what I said earlier, and not just that, sustainable methods like using organic farming techniques, buffer strips, and reducing contaminants can really help mitigate this pollution problem.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Let's bring attention to one more issue on socioeconomic factors.
So, how does water pollution disproportionately affect marginalized and low income communities?
Marginalized and low-income communities often live near industrial areas or in places with poor sanitation infrastructure, which, as a result, exposes them to higher levels of pollution. They may lack resources to advocate for cleaner environments or access to clean water, leading to worse health outcomes, which is incredibly unfortunate.
Yeah, it is very unfortunate. So, what economic models can incentivize businesses, and not just that, but the individuals to reduce water pollution?
So, economic models like, for example, the polluter pays principle, subsidies for or subsidizes for clean technologies and tax incentives for pollution control, which can motivate businesses to reduce emissions, as well as, I would say, public awareness campaigns and rewards for sustainable practices are really important as well, as they can encourage individuals to reduce pollution.
Oh,
Now, that is it for our questions and answer portion. Moving on to a final conclusion. Public awareness can be increased through education campaigns, media coverage, and community engagement activities. So, schools and governments can work together to inform people about the causes and effects of water pollution and obviously ways to reduce it. Hands on learning experiences like field trips, water quality testing, and conservation projects can be very, very effective. Incorporating water pollution topics into the school curriculum and encouraging youth led initiatives such as us can foster a sense of responsibility and stewardship for water resources. So, you, by listening to this podcast, is directly helping us as well as spreading the issues of environmental science and for today, water pollution about our world.
Yes, that's right. So, guys, don't forget to listen to our podcast and maybe leave us a rating or comment. It will really help the show a lot. So, I think that's about it. Thank you for that conclusion,
Yeah,
Finn. So, again,
thank you.
thank you for listening to the Environment Medicine podcast. I am your host, Gianna,
I am your host as well, Finn.
and we are your host for this episode of the Environment Medicine podcast. Thank you for listening.